Welcome, everybody, to the last Blue Jay Center podcast brought to you by the Sick Podcast Network of the 2024 season. I think we can all agree. Thank God it's over. We'll touch on Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins talking to the media today. We'll talk about the 2024 season that was, even though it was painful. And, of course, the offseason outlook heading into 2025. Let's get started.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. Blue Jays Center.
Bautista drives it deep left field. Gone!
The sickest Toronto Blue Jays podcast. It's gonna be sick.
Fellas, it's been a while. I think we all kind of needed just a
1
break
month
from everything. Is that what it was? 1 month?
Yeah. Exactly 1 month, I think it was. I think the last one we recorded was September the 2nd. So it's October the 2nd now. So, yeah.
You and your damn
Been a minute.
Yeah, you know what you're all about. But, yeah, fellas, good to see you. Thank God the season's over. And how we doing, fellas? I mean, obviously, Berto, you're in Windsor now. Cole, you're back at home.
Yep.
How we doing, boys? What's new?
Well, right now I'm indulging in all the playoff baseball that's happening right now.
Yeah.
Very excited for the possibility of the Orioles being swept in the playoffs. And, of course, obviously you mentioned being in Windsor. Had to over here.
Tigers.
For those of you who can't see, I'm rocking a Tigers cap because I've been to a couple Tigers games so far, being here in Windsor for law school, like we mentioned on the last show. It's been a great time. Obviously, the team's bumping right now. Comerica's popping. And I'm hoping to go to a playoff game next week. Now that obviously they're in, they eliminated the Astros today just a few hours ago. So I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully, with my busy schedule, I can fit a game in because that would be pretty awesome to see.
Time out, Berto. It's been established your record at Comerica. How are you doing there with no Blue Jays teams? Are the Tigers still winning games?
Yes, I've been to 6 games this year. They haven't lost, and obviously those two of those were against the Blue Jays when we went earlier in the year. But yeah. In mutual, just like no Blue Jays games, just Tigers against the field. I'm 4-0. I'm 4-0. Yes, I went last week against Tampa. I saw a couple Colorado games, and hopefully. Because, they're a nice little story. Hopefully they can stay undefeated if I go to a playoff game.
Cool. How we doing, pal?
I'm doing good. Definitely not as good as Robin is frisky Tigers, but
Very frisky.
I will say,
Very
despite watching 162 games of this Toronto Blue Jays team, playoff baseball still gets me back into it. I absolutely love playoff baseball. So that's what I'm looking forward to right now. Actually upset that we have to record during it because there's no other option when it comes to October. Basically no off days. So yeah, I wish we didn't have to do this, but we got to finish off the Jays season, and you know what? I'm also in the mood for some ranting. So I'm okay. I'm okay. You?
Well, you know what? Ranting is something that we love to do. And there's two guys who hit the podium today that do none of that. Like it is, and let's get into it, boys. Mark Shapiro, Ross Atkins, media availability today. If you had any expectations of them actually giving you something today, good luck with that. It never happens. No, it never happens. Any of these availabilities, Ross is a robot. But what we do know is that Ross Atkins ain't going anywhere. Mark and Ross going nowhere. John Schneider going nowhere. Yeah, into 2025. Obviously, Mark's contract's up at the end of next season, so it's going to be a weird offseason. We'll get into all that stuff later. But, fellas, I got to get your takeaways from that. The only takeaway that I have is the fact that Mark Shapiro could not say that Vladdy was generational player. That's all I got from it. It's just like, oh, okay, so this is great. The only guy we care about, and you just can't. But I understand it. But I understand why they did it. Rob, let me know, buddy. What are your thoughts on if you want to go at that point or if you want to go just in general?
I think I'm gonna probably touch on the Vlad stuff later. Sure. My biggest takeaway wasn't necessarily this press conference because yes, like you mentioned earlier just now, I'm not new to the party. I've been here for all 9 years that they've been here, heading into 10, and we know very well that basically we saw the writing on the wall from a mile away. We knew that John Schneider is not going anywhere. We knew that Ross Atkins is definitely not going anywhere. I expected Mark Shapiro to come up here and say that, hey, guess what? This robot that you guys all love, I'm recharging the batteries for another year. We're still going to power through another year of Ross Atkins. I expected that. Nothing new really came out of all this. The Vlad stuff we can touch on later. But ultimately, to me, I'm not surprised by anything. I mean, it's basically a rendition of what we saw last year about how this team failed expectations. And in a sense, my biggest point now is what's the plan at this point? Because obviously we know you run the payroll that the Blue Jays ran this season to win 74 games and really not be competitive for a playoff spot for like the last 3.5 months in the season. And even before then, let's be honest, guys, it's not as if there was any point in the season, any consistent stretch of baseball where we pointed at this team and said, yeah, this team looks good. This team looks like they can make a run in the postseason. In a year where, like I mentioned, the Detroit Tigers can make the playoffs with 85 wins or whatever, how many games they won, that you weren't even somewhat competitive, yeah, at this point, there's got to be some finger pointing going on. And the fact that Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro are still here, the fact that obviously John Schneider, an extension of those guys, are still here, that would beg me to think that they must have pitched a pretty good offseason plan to ownership. They said, guess what? We're going to keep a high payroll because one of the most important thing Mark said today was that they're not going to increase or decrease the payroll. So they're going to run one of the higher payrolls in all of baseball again next season. Yeah. And obviously with a bunch of expiring contracts leaving the team this year, that gives them some flexibility. So it must have been that they pitched a pretty good offseason plan where this team can go out, have a good offseason, come back next year with legitimate postseason expectations. To me, that was my major takeaway. And it wasn't just today, like I mentioned. It was something that's been building up for a while now, the last couple of months, really.
Yeah, and I believe he didn't fully confirm that it wasn't going up or down. Really, he said it might fluctuate a bit, but that's more of like a winter meetings kind of conversation. But bottom line, they're not getting like, hey, you guys stink. You're losing a crap load of money and you're not going to be able to use it. So, yeah, Cole, your thought. What are your takeaways, man?
Yeah, I got to be honest. I'd say a lot of the same. I guess my biggest takeaway, yes, it was a bit surprising that Mark Shapiro danced around the generational player question, even though he's right. Like, even though he is right, Vladdy is not a generational player. Like, that those do come around few and far between, and he is not in the same conversation as Shohei Ohtani, Aaron Judge, and Juan Soto. Like, those are 8-win players every year. Vladdy's a 6-win player. You wouldn't consider Tatis a generational player. He's a 6-win player. You wouldn't consider Austin Riley a generational player. He's a 6-win player. Like, he was right. It was just surprising on how he danced around it and didn't actually, like, dance around it and then talk him up, be like, hey, like, yes, I'm admitting he's not generational to you guys, but I also want you to make it clear to you guys that that doesn't mean we don't want him as a Blue Jay. Like, he never actually ended up saying that part, and that part shocks me more than the part that he said. So it shocks me what he didn't say rather than what he did say. But other than that, none of this was a surprise. I will say on Rob's point, if you aren't going to make drastic changes, which after a season like this and a season like the year before and a season like the year before, the last 5 years are you made the postseason 3 out of the 5 years. One of them you shouldn't have made it, and it was a 60-game season, and the other 2 you missed the postseason, and the other 2 you didn't win any games, including the fluke year that you did make the postseason. You didn't win a single playoff game. The fact that you're like, okay, well, from a top of the food chain perspective, we're staying the same. It's like, okay, well then something has to change. Like, your budget might not change, but this philosophy of defense wins championships, that better change. Like, you better go after a corner outfielder that is bat first. You better go after a DH that you can actually plug into the lineup every day. Like, you better go after a bullpen that you trust in leverage situations. Like, that has to change. Not to mention Vladdy and Bo. A decision has to be made on them this offseason. Like, Mark, you want to talk about contract years? Mark Shapiro's in his own contract year, which is ironic in all of this. But Vladdy and Bo also have to have decisions made, like like huge decisions. You can't go with either one of them into the next season not under contract on your team. If they're not going to be on your team after 2025, they better be gone before 2025 starts, right? So you keeping them suggests that you're going to pay them. So I think that for me, my outlook on this offseason is centered around those two pieces. And that for me, that's the biggest question, because what Mark said today suggests to me that the front office has not made a decision on whether or not they're willing to pay Vladimir Guerrero Jr., whatever the current number is.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's been reiterated, is that the Juan Soto of it all, right? He's kind of just waiting to see what happens there first before the contract gets signed and this and that. But it's not from the sounds of it today. Now, again, these guys are professional dudes. They can twist words the way they want to. But something that I did gather is that from both guys, they didn't sound like they're in any rush to get Vladdy signed. Now, that doesn't, like you mentioned, Cole, that doesn't mean that they're not going to sign either of them. But we've talked about it before. If you're a guy, like I'm just going to hypothetically Juan Soto, and the Jays call you, the first question I would ask is, okay, what are you doing with 27? Or what are you doing with it? What are you doing with 11? Right? What are you doing with these two guys after next year? And by the way, where are you guys going to be? Like, we have no idea. So I would close the door right away if they're like, well, and give them their spiel they usually do. So the Vladdy thing is the most important thing to start your offseason. It doesn't sound like they're in any rush to do it. So that's the part where I'm like,
because here's the thing. Like, if he felt from a front office standpoint that the vibes were good in those contract negotiations, that is today's the perfect opportunity to come out and drop a hint to your media. Drop a hint to your fans after a season, after you just got swept at home to finish off the year against one of the worst teams in baseball, one of the 3 worst teams in baseball. You got swept at home to end the year. You know what would be better? You know what would be the perfect thing to be able to come out and say? Vladdy might not be a generational player, but we want him to be a Blue Jay for the rest of his life. Like, that is the perfect thing to say if the vibes are good in the contract negotiations.
Now, with that being said, though, if they do come out and say that, Vladdy's going to be like, you want that?
Yes, that's right.
This is, but hold on.
Where the word salad comes in from all these guys where they do nothing with it.
No, but this is assuming that there's transparency between the two parties and they were already, working on a deal. Like, I'm not saying that Mark says that without speaking to Vladdy first. He says it because they've been speaking for, a week now. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yep. It's these availabilities. Everyone gets all horned up because they're like, oh, what are they going to say? Right. Are they finally going to stop being stiffs and tell us a little something? Well, no, because then they have not even leverage, but they're showing their hand fully.
Yeah, that's leverage. That's the definition of that, showing your hand. Yeah.
Right. And so that's been the biggest disconnect. That's been the biggest disconnect between Blue Jays fans and this front office is that the Blue Jays, the front office understands that this is a leverage, but they obviously it's a working relationship, and obviously I'm sure Mark and Ross have good relationships with all their players, Bo Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. at the forefront. But ultimately, this is a job that they have to do. Like, basically, they're evaluated based on what the product they can put on the field. And obviously, Vlad's going to get paid. Bo Bichette, whether it's going to be here or somewhere else, he's going to get paid. Mark Shapiro wants to get the best value out of these guys. Sure. And obviously, we know you give Mark Shapiro the truth serum, and he's going to tell you, I absolutely want Vlad on my team. Of course, why? How the hell wouldn't I want him on my team? Look at the team we had this year and how we had one of the worst offenses basically in all of baseball the first half of the season. And really, the only saving grace was that in the second half, you had Vlad turn into the best hitter in all of baseball again. You have a guy who, for the second time in 4 years, is going to be a top 5 hitter in all of baseball. You're not going to replace that. We've talked many times on the latter podcasts that we've had, and obviously it's been a while, but sure,
you're not going to replace Vlad. At this point in time, any leverage out there, you've pretty much killed it. And obviously at this point, you want to fight for every dollar, but they have to pay Vlad. There's no realistic scenario where, unless obviously you go out and get a Juan Soto, then maybe that changes the calculus on things. But ultimately, in terms of an attainable, feasible offseason, I don't see how this team can legitimately look at the next 5 years and talk about offensive improvement and not have Vladimir Guerrero Jr. locked into a decade-long contract with a number that starts with a 3. So
you can't talk about competing, that's for sure.
No.
Yes.
If they go into late March of even spring training for that matter, of next year, with neither of them signed, and let's be honest, if it's Bo, then we're still kind of hesitant on it, the whole thing. But regardless, one of the damn two, and they have no contract. We're all sitting here like, so are we ready to hit the hard rebuild button?
Yeah, you failed. Your offseason is a failure. Absolutely. If Juan Soto's not on your team and Vladdy and Bo aren't under contract when opening day rolls around, your offseason was a failure.
Oh no, I'm not saying that. Absolutely, it would be. Absolutely, it would be, because let's be honest. At that point, you're probably not bringing in the guys you want to bring in.
No,
because why would they come into a situation like this? So, it's ugly, and they gave us nothing, but we're here to talk about it. Now, what we're also here to talk about is homage, fellas, because we got the good stuff, whether you want to buy Blue Jays stuff or not, because, they stink. However, you can buy other teams' merch. Cole's got his Chiefs stuff on. You can buy some basketball stuff. Rob's got Miami Heat gear as well. I got some Raptor stuff here. Go check out the links down below, guys. It's awesome stuff. Great quality as well. And, hey, you know what else? Well, it wasn't quality, fellas. Yeah, I tried to flip that there. It didn't work.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, okay. Anyways.
I got it. So the other piece of paraphernalia I have from Homage is a Jays t-shirt that says back to back when they went back to back in 92, 93. Ironically enough, the Chiefs also have gone back to back, but there was no shot I was wearing the Jays back to back today because this is not a season that I would like to run again next year, obviously. And on top of that, it's also my favorite hoodie, and that's thanks to Homage. So, yeah,
this was probably one of the most painful seasons I have watched because at least in 2018, when they were pretty freaking awful, at least you were able to keep an eye on the minor leagues. Oh, what's Vladdy and Bo doing? Oh, they're kicking everyone's ass. Oh, we're in good shape. And obviously 2019, you get to see the guys.
Yeah, and now no expectations.
What do we do?
Here's the thing, Pricey. You mentioned the analogy, the 2018. I'm going to do another analogy and why this season was particularly painful. And obviously, it's a season that many Blue Jays fans, if you were there, you obviously know the 2013 team.
Oh, dreadful.
And the biggest reason why that team failed, obviously, in hindsight, we knew that maybe they weren't all that great to begin with, but they had a lot of injuries, man. You look at all the injuries that team suffered. That wasn't the Juan Francisco year. That was the next year. But ultimately, you go through up and down that pitching rotation. Brandon Morrow was supposed to have a nice bounce back year. He obviously got hurt. Josh Johnson, one of their biggest acquisitions. He obviously got hurt just to, I don't have to go back and relive the ghosts from the past. But ultimately, my point is that season, a lot of it went off the rails due to injury. A big part of it. I'm not going to say that's everything, but a big part of it. That's the last time the Blue Jays also finished last in their division, 5th in the AL East. With this season, obviously Bo Bichette, and that's huge. I'm not going to downplay it. Bo Bichette, a guy who we penciled in. Go ahead. What's up?
Rob, I think I could be wrong with this, and it's close though. At least I believe the Jays this year, injury-wise, they were one of the most healthy teams in baseball, and they had like the least amount of man games lost due to injury in all of baseball, and you still stunk. So
and that's where I'm headed with this. And then obviously you mentioned the health, which is obviously a massive variable for all 30 teams. Yep. You mentioned just there the Blue Jays not one of the teams that were necessarily snake bitten by injuries. Obviously, every team's going to have their share of injuries over 162, and obviously maybe that's a big reason why Bo Bichette was so ineffective. But ultimately, he was the one guy that you look at this whole roster that he significantly underperformed expectations. This was a guy coming into the season that we had basically penciled in for a 4 or 5 win season, and ultimately he was nowhere near that. And maybe this season's a little bit different had he had a regular Bo season, but ultimately this is just how baseball works, man. You're just gonna have some years where some of your guys are not going to be up to par. Like there's a very short list of guys, and even Vlad, for example, you obviously has this great season, but all the other years, we talked ad nauseum how you can't have a consistent elite player every year in and year out, and the reason why is because unless you're Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, Juan Soto, maybe Yordan Alvarez, there's very few who actually do have elite seasons year in and year out. You have to be able to prepare for it, and the fact that the Blue Jays, I mean, obviously we know Bo Bichette, that's obviously a huge loss, the fact that he was so ineffective, but go through the whole roster. There's no one that really downplayed expectations that significantly, that horrendously, where it justified this team being this bad. To me, my biggest takeaway is that this team was this bad because they're just this bad.
Yeah.
As of right now, this roster is just not that good. It's not. They weren't snake bitten. They didn't have this season from hell in terms of bad luck. They just weren't that good. It's that simple.
And Bo Bichette specifically, I got 2 points. One, he from an offensive player standpoint, he was the guy who you could rely on the most. The guy who you thought coming into the year was the one guy. You're like, you know what? I know what I'm getting out of Bo Bichette this year. That's it.
Yes, exactly.
On top of that, anybody that wants to rebuttal us in this injury stuff and that Bo Bichette actually matters, and if you peg him in for 5 more wins, then all of a sudden the Jays maybe have a chance, which is still not true. But you wouldn't have gotten 3 WAR from Ernie Clement if Bo Bichette had a healthy year. So you can't give me that. Bo Bichette would have had to been 5 WAR better than Ernie Clement to actually make a difference on this team, and obviously he wouldn't have been that. So there is no rebuttal when it comes to Bo Bichette being injured this year. None. And no rebuttal for even Bo Bichette being bad this year. This team, like Rob said, wasn't good from the start.
No,
that's actually my next biggest takeaway from this season is that the Bo Bichette of it all is that you can't actually. It's more proof that nothing is guaranteed in this sport.
No,
it's more proof that like you mentioned, Cole, the one guy who You look at his baseball reference page and his previous half decade of sample, and every year consistently high 120s OPS plus, amongst one of the best hitters in the American League in terms of getting on base and bat. Well, not getting on base because that's
no hits, just straight up hits. Yeah,
hits in terms of straight up hits and like offensive profile. And yeah, that was the one guy who you could peg that. Okay, I know what I'm getting out of Bo Bichette, and it turns out you can't even count on that. That just goes to show. That just goes to show that there's nothing's a sure thing in baseball. And obviously we reiterated that many times, but this clearly really aggressively put it over the top for me.
Just to give people an idea of how bad the season was for Bo. Now, obviously, he only played 81 games, which is significantly less than every other season. But if his low, I'm going to go through the numbers. So batting average, I don't care, but regardless, his lowest going into the year 290. He hit 225. Yeah. His lowest on-base percentage for his career going into this season, 328, and that was in the COVID year. 277 this season. OPS, lowest going into this season, 802. 599 this year. I mean, it's just
crack a 600
off a cliff. Like they pull the Leafs and the 18-wheeler off the cliff. Like, hello. Yes. It's incredible. In baseball, man, and everyone getting all warmed up for Ernie Clement. I'm like, dude, I mean, it's 692 OPS. Is this what we're doing now?
Yeah.
But boys, I mean, look, we can keep talking about this, but I do want to bring up, because we forgot to bring up the people who did get fired from the Toronto Blue Jays, and I guess it's a takeaway from 2024.
Yeah.
Really the end of the season now. Guillermo Martinez gone, and everyone's like, wants to throw a party because Guillermo's gone. And you guys have all seen that video on Twitter, that guy that about the Jays game that wants Guillermo fired all the time. It's hilarious. That's funny. And he finally got his wish. But I don't care. I could care less about if he's here or not.
Yeah.
And people are going to talk about, what are you talking about? Well, these offensive, he was also the hitting coach in 2021, the team we all loved. And even in 2022, when this team was fantastic and they made the damn playoffs.
Yeah. No, he is not making a bad team a good team. That's for sure. And he's not going to make a good team a great team.
No hitting coaches.
No hitting coaches.
Also couch that.
No hitting coaches. No hitting coaches.
Everyone was getting, giving Don Mattingly hell, and then Matt Haig, he's the whisperer. Yeah. Oh, okay, but all right, let's settle down.
And speaking of Mattingly,
yeah, we'll get to that. Gil Kim obviously got let go as well, and then an assistant pitching coach. Sure. Yeah. Fine. Whatever.
Also a backup translator. I remember he could speak pretty good Spanish.
Oh yeah. So did the guy when Rear. Yeah. Oh yeah.
When Hector couldn't. I think he was like away from the team, and then obviously they had Gil Kim in there, and he held his own, man. I was impressed.
Attaboy, Rob. Because people who are listening to this pod can't tell that you're joking. That's brutal. Anyways, Don Mattingly. Yeah. To the Don Mattingly of it all, as Cole mentioned, he's out as offensive coordinator. Sure.
Who would have thought? Who would have thought the made-up role wasn't going to last more than a year?
God, yeah, I didn't know the Jays Toronto had an NFL team, but according to Mattingly's offensive coordinator role, we must have.
Not a good one.
No, not a good one. Getting the offense. Anyways, he's just a bench coach again. So they had him as a bench coach, offensive coordinator. Oh God, our offense is bad. Go back to the bench, Don.
Yeah,
sure. What are we doing? Anyways, let's get back to the season because I wanted to touch on that. There's a lot of things, fellas. We can talk negative all we want, and we could, but I do want to find some positives. And there are a couple. Obviously, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., we can start with that, or we can go Bowden Francis' end of the season, the last 2 months, where he was just kind of unbelievable. And the season numbers actually look unbelievable, considering that horrific start he had. We'll start with Vlad, though, because he's at the forefront of everybody's mind right now. We know the horrific first half. And then, as Rob mentioned, best hitter in baseball. And that did coincide with the Blue Jays not being any good after that. But who cares? Because numbers.
Hang on. This has started well into April.
We know after April, Rob. Is this what you're going to get to? After April, he was great.
No, it was well. If you look at like the last week of April, that's when he had started his ascent.
Okay, Rob. Yeah. Anyways, but he was great.
The thing is that it wasn't just when they were out of it. It was factually it wasn't.
It's not like they were out of it in June, but okay. Because we all wanted people fired at that point. But yes, he was outstanding. Obviously, the ground ball percentage went down, line drives all over the place, got to 30 bombs again. Just a machine. And that was a 940 OPS on the season.
Yep.
Cole, your thoughts on Vladdy's 2024?
So great, obviously, objective. I'm glad that we can finally sit here and say you can rely on a 5+ WAR year from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. year in and year out, and if you don't get it, he is missing expectations. You should expect, and he should be paid as such, as an expected 5 WAR player year in and year out for the next decade. That is confirmed. And going into the year, that was not confirmed at all. Going into the year, we weren't even sure if we wanted to be the ones to pay him, let alone what people should be paying him and what the expectations should be for Vlad going forward. Now we know. And that's with Vladdy being average defensively. He didn't have an elite defensive year like he did in 2021 when he put up a 6 WAR and when he batted in Buffalo. No, this is a legit 6 WAR year from an offensive standpoint. A guy who plays first base at a serviceable level. So that to me, and Rob, we were going to bring this up later, but I'm going to just say right now because we're here. That was my biggest takeaway from 2024. It had to have been Vladimir Guerrero Jr. because that's the biggest question you had going into 2024 was Vladimir Guerrero Jr. So if that question was answered, in my opinion, that's the biggest takeaway from the year, and I'm glad that now we know exactly what the dollar amount he should be getting paid is. And I think if you look through it, I brought up Tatis earlier. I brought up Austin Riley earlier. I know Tatis signed his contract early. I know people think Austin Riley's contract is team-friendly. Both of them fell below $25 million AAV. I'm not going to sit here and say that's what Vlad should get, but I am going to sit here and say I don't think he should get paid more than 30. I don't think he should get paid more than 30 AAV. I think that is adjusting for inflation over the last couple years. I think that's adjusting for the fact that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Is not going to take a team-friendly deal. I think both of those previous ones were team-friendly, and now I think with Vlad, that's where your contract negotiations should start and stop. And we've been saying that on this pod anyways, that his contract shouldn't... It should start with a 3, but probably be at a 3, period. Yeah.
Rob, before I get your thoughts on that, my dreadful takeaway, because the negative mind has just been cooking for the last couple months. I know it didn't mean anything. I guess technically it did, but the moment for me where the season fell off a cliff.
Oh no!
I think I know where Rob's going with this is when we were in Kansas City.
Kansas City, yes.
And you had won a series against the Yankees 2 out of 3. You went to San Diego 1, 2 or 3. You were 4 or 5 games over 500. You had just won the opener in KC. You had a chance to win that ball game. Game 2 in KC, and you were up. What was it, 2-0? I think like in the 7th inning, Velo was down a bit, but he was shoving and ground ball to shorter third, fire onto first, and he just whiffed on it, and that led to a 3-run inning. You give up the lead, you lose that game, you go on to lose 5 in a row, and basically don't look back after. Now the team was flawed. Like, we all know the team was flawed. But
if it wasn't going to come then, it was going to come at some point.
Yeah. But that's the negative side of my brain continuing to cook. But yeah, Rob, your thoughts on Vladdy's 2024?
I thought you were actually going to go with the Jimmy Garcia because to me, like that Vladdy moment, that was the moment where I thought this team wasn't good. But once Jimmy Garcia got hurt and they had like literally nobody in the bullpen, there's no like not even you can't even talk yourself into because remember. In like the middle of June, they were like a game out of a playoff spot. I mean, as bad as we thought this team was, I mean, they were right there. They were the thick of things. So that I thought you were gonna go there. Vlad, I want to touch on what Cole said, and obviously I don't want to keep this point on too long because I don't want to make it about economics and that part of baseball. I know it's not particularly interesting, but you did mention the comps of. I think you mentioned who did you mention?
Tatis and Riley.
Exactly. Tatis and Riley. Yeah, I think I was gonna go along that. That's the kind of precedent contract that we're going to see for Vlad. I was going to go specifically to Rafael Devers. I mean, a lot of people are thinking, Freddie Freeman or Matt Olson. Vlad's not going to get paid as a first baseman who's in his like other side of 30, like those guys were a couple years ago. He's going to get paid as I think the Rafael Devers comp is the best one in large part because Vlad's basically the right-handed hitting version of Rafael Devers. You look at their overall offensive numbers; they're basically identical so far through the points of their careers. I know, obviously. Rafael Devers is a left-handed hitting third baseman, whereas Vlad is a right-handed hitting first baseman. Albeit
bad.
Rafael Devers is not a good third baseman,
but that also hurts. That hurts his numbers too. That hurts his WAR. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But I think that's the contract. So obviously we mentioned we all acknowledge a left-handed hitting third baseman more valuable than a right-handed hitting first baseman. But the biggest point of differentiation is that unlike Rafael Devers, Vlad's going to be signing a contract where there's no incentive for him to sign right now. An extension, that is. Because we all know, regardless of what happens this offseason, at the end of a year from now, Vlad's going to have multiple offers at his mailbox, or in this case his agent's mailbox, with the 10-figure deals. Sorry, 10-figure, 10-year, $300 million deals, and barring some like unforeseen drop in production coincided with actual underlying numbers also being not impressive, or God forbid some off-field character issues, Vlad's gonna get paid a lot of money next offseason, whether it's from the Blue Jays or from someone else. Whereas with Rafael Devers, when he signed his contract, despite playing a more premium position, there's more incentive for him. There was more incentive for him to sign a team friendly extension at that point, because there was so many more years of control. Whereas Vlad, he's gonna get paid regardless. So the only way you're gonna get this done is you're probably gonna pay the freight that you would have paid for Rafael Devers, or even more. Who knows what the economics of baseball are going to be at that time. We're surprised every year when these offseason numbers come up. So just a quick point there in terms of the economic side of things. But ultimately, yeah, like I think Vlad's season was incredible, and especially it's more incredible given the current state of baseball as it is, where, like I mentioned many times, there's really not many great hitters that do it consistently year in and year out. And the fact that you have a floor now for Vlad, whereas we talked about coming into this season how he never had a season as good as his 2021 season. Well, he's never had a season as bad as last season. All of his other full seasons, they were all a high floor, a 130 OPS plus, which is incredible. I mean, there's not many guys who can say that that's their floor as a hitter, and that's basically what Vlad's been so far through his career. A guy with an OPS in the 900s, an OPS plus in 160s. The only reason why you'd watch this team in the second half of the season, frankly, you can't afford not to have him for the foreseeable future. You're not going to replace a top 5 hitter in baseball. I've said it many times. So I think that's also a major takeaway that you identified, that having Vlad be the elite hitter that he is, and basically now at this point, no question that you have to pay him what he wants. That's obviously a major takeaway.
Definitely. And you mentioned, Rob, the only reason to watch the Jays in 2024. Yes. I would say not. There was one other guy.
Second half.
There was one other guy in this like you mentioned, in the second half of the season that there's a reason to watch, and that was Bowden Francis. Look, you look at his career numbers now; they look great, right? That first half of this season was pretty pathetic. Obviously went down to Buffalo, and shout out Brian Servin for being down there with him, and then he came back up and. All of a sudden became one of the best pitchers in all of baseball, won August pitcher of the month, and in September was still damn good as well. Ended the year with a 3.30 ERA, a whip of 0.93. And even last year, again, we all know his role last season, right? It was very, low leverage type stuff. Still at a $1.73 ERA and a whip of 0.83. And those are combined 140 innings. So, it was an outstanding season. And we'll get into the 2025. We'll get into the, the outlook of next season later on in the off season before we talk about, is Bowden real? But this season, do you believe? I'm trying to figure this out. No, you don't believe. Okay.
No, I think I'll get into it right now. I'm not sold. I'm sorry. It's as simple as that. Bowden Francis has shown a good sample of being really, really bad, and a good sample of being really, really good. And guess what? Who has also done that, and a larger sample of both, Alek Manoah. And I think we would all sit here and agree that we're not sold on Alek Manoah next year. I'm definitely not sold on Bowden Francis, and there's another reason why I brought up the Alek Manoah comparison, and if you listen to all of our podcasts this year, well, then you are already familiar with this comparison, but I'll say it again for the people that aren't familiar. You look at the profile in Baseball Savant for this year, Bowden Francis, it is eerily similar to the profile for Alek Manoah in his best year. The major difference is that Alek Manoah that year had elite breaking ball. Bowden Francis doesn't have that. But they're both big guys, similar builds. Obviously, Bowden's got, he's a bit slimmer than Alek Manoah was the year that Alek Manoah went off for that 1 year. But they're both big guys that throw from the right side of the mound. And they have a similar profile in terms of a Baseball Savant page in Manoah's best year and Bowden's year this year. Obviously, one huge difference. So here's what I'll say optimistically and pessimistically about Bowden Francis next year. You can give me an elite breaking ball? Yeah, I'm sold. I'm 100% sold. You can't? Okay, well, then I think you're a volatile pitcher, which is fine. That's the majority of pitchers in Major League Baseball is volatile. But yeah, I think that's the one thing I'm looking forward to. If we go to the offseason and through spring training and all I hear about is, he developed a new breaking ball, it's working, lots of swing and miss, he's getting lots of chase, blah, blah, blah. You know what? Then then I'll make a decision on, you know what, I think you can peg him in to be a guy every 5 days. But until that happens, a 2-pitch pitcher, we know it. You can't rely on it. It's hit or miss.
It's funny. You bring up Alek Manoah's comparison on the field, very, very similar. Off the field, not so much. Very different fellas off the field. All right, Rob, your thoughts, buddy.
I think you are sold, Cole. I think you are sold because you're comparing him to Alek Manoah. Bowden Francis was a nobody coming into this season. He was a thought. He was a possibility. And the fact that we're already saying that, hey, there's a chance that we think he could be a legitimate major league starter. And obviously the question, are you sold on Bowden Francis?
Exactly.
I'm not sold that he's
I'm sold on him getting an opportunity. I'm not sold on him being good in that opportunity. Yeah.
Yes. Obviously, he's not going to be the best pitcher in baseball over the course of a full season. We all know all our concerns. The fastball just isn't good enough. The breaking stuff, like you mentioned, a little questionable. And obviously, just think about it like logically. Like, there's a reason why it took him this long to establish himself as a major leaguer. Mm-hmm. It's because it's the upside, just not all that there. So yeah, obviously, I'm not sold that Bowden Francis is the solution to this team's problems. And now all of a sudden, who's going to fill in that ace role next year? It's not going to be Bowden Francis. Yeah. Heads up. But am I sold that he can be? Well, two things. Can he be a legitimate, competent back-end starter? I think that we saw enough where I feel decent about him getting a shot next year. And at the same time, what that means is that I think they did a good job of taking off one thing that they have to do this offseason, and that's getting a depth starter in terms of like a back-end legitimate guy. I think as of right now, for the first time in a long time, we've seen the Blue Jays rotation. While the high upside there of an ace is no longer there. And I want to talk about that, actually. It's one of my biggest takeaways for this season. Yep. We'll talk about that shortly. But ultimately, you have a rotation that you feel pretty good about in terms of depth, too. And we don't have to even go into, the other guys. So obviously, you have the three guys, Kevin Gausman, Jose Barrios, and
Chris Bassett.
Chris Bassett, yes. And obviously, you have now Bowden Francis going to be rounding it out. And then obviously, Yariel Rodriguez, I'm curious to see how he does with another year of spring training. We saw a lot of gaps in his game, but also I thought I saw enough good on tape where I'm intrigued with a full offseason and a full spring training. And obviously we mentioned Jake Bloss. He's a guy who I think is going to get some look in spring training. I think the rotation in terms of depth looks pretty good. It looks good enough where if the team is good, maybe you go out there and make a starting pitching move at the deadline. I think they're good enough for that. So in terms of answering that question, I am sold that Bowden Francis can be at the very least a decent major league starter next year as a back end guy. Obviously.
Yeah, I'm not there yet either. Just so we're clear. Yeah, I'm still not sold on competency. Only because
so you don't think Bowden Francis could put up like a 4.80 ERA next year?
That's
like an average ERA.
I think
like
he can.
ERA for a starter.
I think he can. I'm not sold. That's what's going to happen. I'll say this: if he put up a 6 ERA in the first half of next year, that wouldn't shock me. That's kind of what I'm saying. Yeah,
fair enough.
That's fair. And that's fair. Now, Jimmy was reading my mind. Let's jump, fellas. Enough of 2024. Let's put that damn thing.
Hold on. Rob did already mention his takeaway, but I also have one takeaway. You said we said we could figure out what we're pegging Vladian year in and year out. For anybody, including myself, that doesn't like what I'm about to say, it is true. You can peg in a 4+4 from Dalton Varsho every year as a below average hitter. This year he finished with a 98 OPS plus, right below league average. Still put up his best year in the majors, which was a 5-1 WAR on Baseball Reference.
Yeah,
right. One last thing before we move on to the offseason, I do want to talk about the pitching staff because I think that was one of the major themes coming into the season. That was what we had our hopes on, that this pitching staff was going to be elite because it was elite last season. It was one of the best starting rotations in all of baseball. And while it wasn't quite as elite this year, it was still very good. It was still inarguably the strength of this team. But ultimately, and maybe it's a bit of recency bias, but you watched the Detroit Tigers yesterday, a completely flawed team. As we all know, they won 85 games, or I think it was 86 actually, but their 85th win was enough to clinch them a playoff spot. And you felt decent about their chances in this series against a great Astros team who the last half decade has just completely dominated the American League because they had an ace. And in a wild card series, an ace can get you half your wins by having an outstanding performance. Tarek Skubal, obviously, he's going to win the Cy Young. He won the Triple Crown already. An incredible pitcher. And while the Blue Jays rotation, while we think it's going to be decent next year, at least in the start, I still can't get over the fact that they don't really have that number one guy anymore. Kevin Gausman was that guy.
Yeah.
He was that guy for multiple years. He was a Cy Young candidate for multiple seasons, but we saw clearly a dip in his production. And I think my biggest point of worrisome is that one of my other biggest takeaways is that when a pitcher starts spring training late, he's going to spend the whole season trying to catch up. We saw with Yusei Kikuchi 2 years ago how awful he was. He came up late in spring training because of that whole lockout, and he was a disaster to start the season. Have 2 straight years with a decent spring training, decent offseason, a much different pitcher. So I'm hoping that part of Gosman's struggles earlier on in the year were due to that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the fact that his strikeout rates dropped, the fact that his velocity dropped, to me, those are concerning issues for next year. And as great as Jose Barrios was, specifically at the start and end of the season, I think he proved once again that as good as his stuff is, as good as he can look at his best,
Not an ace.
through 162, he's not an ace.
Yeah.
And he's a great pitcher. Don't get me wrong. Again, 190 innings, 32 starts, an ERA under 4, an ERA plus in the high 1 teens. That's extremely valuable, extremely great contract, great trade, no doubt about it. But I can't get over the fact that this rotation being the Blue Jays' strength, and also because they have to address so much of the offense, they have to address so much of the bullpen, they're not going to have resources to go out and get an ace this offseason. I can't get over the fact that that's a part of this team that's missing, and I don't think they're going to get it.
Yeah, I think you brought up how good it is to have depth. I think that depth only means so much because
depth is for the regular season. You need a guy.
And in my opinion, all of our depth is super volatile. We're talking about 2 guys that are going to hit age 35 years.
Depth usually is volatile.
No, I know, that's what I'm saying.
Why Major League depth,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. But all of our guys, our best guys are volatile. Like our best guys are 35 plus next year. And then our guy who's under 35, who is our best guy, we just admitted he's not an ace. And I think that this is a low-key big issue for 2025 because if you don't get a legit guy, you said earlier in the pod that you don't think we need a legit. I disagree. I do think we need a legit guy in that rotation next year.
I said we do. When did I say we didn't?
You said Bowden filled out the back end, and maybe that's not a hole you need to plug in for next year.
That part, yes, but a guy at the front end.
Obviously the front end. Yeah, that's.
By the way, fellas, before we go any further, the Baltimore Orioles just got eliminated.
Yeah.
So 2-1 KC dub.
Yeah.
There it is. 2 games.
Oh, buddy.
So you're telling me
that's huge.
2 teams that were 10 games over 500, 86 and 76 are off to the ALDS.
Yep. That's the 2-game wild card series for you.
And that's the final takeaway that we can have is that the Blue Jays should absolutely try to contend because there's no reason why they can't be this year's Detroit Tigers.
No,
that's that simple.
God, no.
It's that simple.
I mean, you look at all the Tigers' numbers. I mean, look, I look at that bullpen and I'm like, and that's where we'll go first, fellas. The offseason outlook for 2025, I guess 2024 and 2025 offseason.
2024 offseason, 2025 season, yes.
Yeah, there's a lot to plug. Now, Rob, you mentioned, hey, Bowden Francis could be that number 4 starter. Great. We still need an ace. We still need an entire bullpen. You need about 2 or 3 bats. So a whole team we basically need going into 2025. Lovely stuff. Where do we start, boys? Because the offense sucks. The bullpen blows. Your starting rotation, as Cole mentioned, they're getting old.
Yeah.
So
I think we have our answer. And to be honest, I think it was a perfect segue from talking about the Orioles being eliminated and the Astros being eliminated. Yep. Pitching wins in the postseason. That's where you start. Your number 1 priority is the ace or the bullpen. And when I mean that means you solidify one of those things. If you're going to go after your bullpen, if that's what you consider your priority because you have enough faith in that starting rotation to get you through 162 games and, win you a couple wild card games, fine. Sure, I'm okay with that. If that means I have 2 guys next to Jordan Romano next year where I can peg you in the 7th and 8th and I don't have to think twice about it. If you can give me that, sure. But again, that means you pay bullpen guys. And as we I've mentioned plenty times on our podcast and on our shows on Blue Jay Center, don't do that. You don't pay bullpen guys. You need that to be quote unquote volatile. You need that magic needs to happen. It's kind of like goaltending in the NHL. It just happens. Like either you're hot or you're not hot, and that's kind of what it is. So in my opinion, you go after an ace because if your ace can give you a chance to win the game, then your offense hopefully can figure it out from there.
So there's 2 things I got to say about that. One is yes, you're right. Elite pitching does win in the postseason. We were all before that, and we did see it last year. The Blue Jays were factually an elite pitching staff last year. They were top 3 in all of baseball, and it proved that you can be as elite as you want pitching. If you don't score more than 1 run in a 2-game series, it is impossible to win. Do the math. If you score 1 run in a 2-game series, you're not going to win a game. It's impossible. So while yes, you are right that we do need an elite pitching staff, which we're not quite there yet, and while an ace is definitely, I think, would be something that would put us over the top, I don't think this team has the means to go for an ace this offseason.
I agree.
And what I mean by that is because your offense is so far behind the 8 ball.
Oh yeah.
Your bullpen is so on the bullpen. I don't even start on the bullpen.
And you've already allocated so much. But the reason why you're in this position is because so much of that money has already been allocated to the guys that you are going to have on your roster next year.
Exactly. So basically, my point is that they're not going to have if you're going to fill all those major holes, the whole of the ace. I'm not sure that's going to be attainable. And my second point. That you're correct, completely correct. All these successful teams. Look at the Tampa Bay Rays. I'm not sure if you guys watched that series was it 2 weeks ago now or a week ago?
Oh, they're both.
We played them. A bunch of guys you've never heard of coming up and throwing at all these arm angles, throwing high velo, and it just seems like how is it so unfair that all these teams can find guys who can go out and fill these holes, and yet the Blue Jays, unless they go out there and spend multiple asset capital, spend legitimate prospects, give up a silver slugger for relief pitchers. Yeah. It's going to be the hindrance point. The bullpen has filled this team 3 of the last 4 years. The only year, obviously, being last year, where it didn't matter because the bullpen was irrelevant because you couldn't score any runs for it to have the elite blow.
Right.
It's just maddening how this team just can't develop any legitimate pitching arms, and unfortunately, that has gotten me to think that at the end of the day, like you just have to go out there and get them externally. You have to go out there and pay the freight on a Jimmy Garcia 2.0, on a Chad Green 2.0. God forbid an Eric Swanson 2.0 where you give up a legitimate major league ready guy to bring another reliever who had an ERA of 6 this past season.
Yeah.
But anyways,
one of those Rays guys that you talked about, Rob, Hunter Biggie, that dude's nuts. 24 punch outs in 17 innings, and it's a Rays special, right? He picked him up after he threw a total of 3 1/3 innings for his career with the Chicago Cubs. Comes over and dude's pumping like 100, and he's with the Rays, and you're like, who the hell is this guy? Where did he come from? So, and he's got like control up the wazoo. So get used to that name in Tampa.
My biggest takeaway is that you mentioned 2 to 3 bats, 2 to 3 legitimate impact bats. I'm not sure you'd be able to afford that necessarily. I think that
you can't.
No, you can't.
If you're only spending $50 million, which is what they're going to spend.
And if you're in the trade market, you don't have the prospects for it. So
you don't have the prospects for it. Yes, and I think that's how you would acquire an ace. You wouldn't acquire by paying him because who are you going to pay? You're going to pay Blake Snell. I mean, is he really that number one guy that you feel so great about?
Corbin Burns is in there as well, but like
he's the free agent.
Yeah, he is.
Regardless, this team just doesn't have it. If they're going to pay Vlad, if they're going to pay a bat, you can't pay an ace, unfortunately. So my offseason plan is this. They're going to need at least one legitimate offensive power bat, whether that's Anthony Santander, whether that's Tyler O'Neill. There was another guy, I think. I can't – name's not coming – like another guy was a free agent. Sorry?
Bregman.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's a guy that would help a lot. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But basically, I think that you're going to get one of those guys and maybe a guy who's – sorry?
Teoscar Hernandez.
Yeah, he's available.
Right. I mean, we know how helpful he is.
I just got all the offensive names here, Rob. So I just got like Willie Adames. Yeah. I mean, what the hell are they doing with Bo? Jurickson Profar.
Willie Adames, yes.
Jurickson Profar obviously coming off an all-star season, but after he signed a $1 million contract with San Diego, so that'd be weird. Jay's killer, Carlos Santana, Christian Walker, Tyler O'Neill, Pete Alonso. And then it flies off a cliff because I'm seeing Paul Young. So no.
But my point is, I think they need to go out there and get a legitimate bona fide top of the market guy, like George Springer was in 2021, a legitimate top market free agent who's going to go out there and be a legitimate elite bat for you. And then I think they have to go out and get a more low key guy, a guy who can have an under the radar great season, a guy who maybe is coming off not so great of a season, but his profiles suggest that in this ballpark he can hit a lot better. Basically, their version of Marcus Semien for this season. The guy who's not going to like break the bank for you. And obviously, I mean, Marcus Semien, he's not going to be an MVP candidate with 45 home runs as second baseman. I'm not saying that. That's obviously the 99th percentile. But a guy of that linear thinking, those are your 2 bats. You go out there and you get 3 legitimate relievers. Yeah, you have to pay money for, unfortunately, because you can't develop anybody and you have no one coming up, unfortunately. But that's the scenario that we live in. And much like 2021, if you have a good season, first half of the year, you go all in and you end up getting that ace type guy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the format that should be. They should follow the 2021
expiring ace.
format.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. An expiring ace.
Now you mentioned you want 3. You said 3, right? Bullpen arms, Rob?
Yeah, at least 3. At least
So
3.
these are the free agent relievers. Jeff Hoffman, former Blue Jay farmhand, obviously really figured
Oh
it out
god. Oh
with the
god.
Phillies, which would be interesting.
He was awesome this season, by the way, too, which is like
Absolutely
a
fantastic.
a decade after being traded from the Blue Jays.
He's a
Yeah.
2.1 WAR as a reliever. So there's
Yeah.
that. Jay for about 5 seconds. Kirby Yates is a free agent, but he was ridiculous for the Texas Rangers. I think he was an All-Star this year.
See, here's the good thing about this idea, though. None of these guys are going to get paid like Josh Hader. None of these guys are going to get paid like Edwin Diaz.
No.
So it's like these. You know what? In this particular market, it might be a good year to spend some assets. Yeah.
That's the top
Hey,
two.
and since we're on the theme of former Jays, I mean Jimmy Garcia, like that worked out pretty nice for a couple of years. Why not run that back?
Yeah.
Well, these are all the
Free
names.
agent, we know that.
I'm just gonna rip through them for you guys. So Tanner Scott, obviously, lefty closer reliever thing.
Yeah, he might get paid a lot.
Yeah, Kenley. Yeah, because he's only 30, so he's gonna get paid. Kenley Jansen, obviously, Clay Holmes, Carlos Esteves, all the Chapman still kicking around. Blake Trine and Chris Martin. He's a big righty on the Red Sox. Jose Leclerc. And then we're getting down into some older names. Obviously, Jimmy Garcia, Paul Sewald, former Mariners closer. So there's some guys here. There are some guys.
I'm sorry. In 2024 and 2025, guys who throw 100 do grow on trees. So here's my other option. I don't care if the entire bullpen is guys I never heard of until next year, until I watch them go on the mound and pump 98. Like, if they could do that, then you know what? I'm like, you know what? Process over results. You got a bunch of guys that throw 100. I'm with you. To throw from different arm angles, different sides of the. I got it. You're good. In my opinion, I'll be happy. Obviously, I'll be happy if you pay guys, but I'm also happy if you just get guys that throw 100 and not names, just guys, just dudes.
Yeah, and I mean, there's tons. I'm keep going down here. There's lots of other guys. Caleb Fieldmar, who was great in the Minnesota Twins. Let's keep going here. Scott Barlow, former closer for the Kansas City Royals. There's one down there. I don't think he pumps on it. Ryan Stanek is on the list as well. There are guys here, fellas. Former J. Miguel Castro is a free agent.
And I think this is a realistic thing. Like, to be honest, if you're not going to go get Juan Soto, which in my opinion, I've already discussed it before, it's one of our most watched pods on YouTube. You should go get Juan Soto. You should at the very least not get outbid. If Juan Soto chooses New York, he chooses New York. Don't get outbid by New York for Juan Soto. That's my only takeaway. I don't care what happens other than that. If you can't get him, then I'm with Rob, and I do think it's actually a realistic possibility. You with $50 million, you can extend Vlad's contract an extra $9 million AAV. You can get a legit bat for $15, $20 million. You can get 3 bullpen guys for $2 to $3 million a piece, but they throw 100. And then you can get a starter for $15 million. Do the math. That's right around $50 million. It is possible. If you allocate your resources correctly, you can fix the holes from a good process standpoint.
No, that's all.
Here's my last point. I say don't even get a starter because here's the thing. I have enough confidence that the back end is good enough. Whereas the only starter that would make an impact would be a legitimate ace, and obviously you're not going to get an ace for that amount of money, for that little money. So to me, I think you can roll this rotation up until the deadline, and if you're contending and if you're in it, I think that's where you go out and get your starter.
I'm with you, Rob, because you go through the 5, right? You obviously
spend that money, in my opinion. If you're not getting a starter, that $50 million better have been used.
Well, damn well better.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, obviously.
You got Gaz, Barrios, Bassett. Let's put Bowden in there. Yariel Rodriguez. And then you can start firing names out there. Like you mentioned Jake Bloss earlier, Rob. I mean, by July, maybe August, you might see Alek Manoah start kicking around and make a little Marcus Stroman entrance, right, at the end of the season for a playoff push. Who the hell knows? And then the wild card of all wild cards is these guys who had season-ending injuries this past year who could make that. I don't know if Ricky will be available by then. I don't know the timeline on that, but there are options.
I don't want to assume anything.
But there are options.
With Ricky Tiedemann.
And what we just talked about, that's like 7 guys deep. And so now the Jays, guys are just getting older, though.
Yeah, I just say
more. Other times undefeated. So
I know.
Father Time is undefeated, but ultimately you're paying Kevin Gosman $20 million next year.
Oh,
Like,
you
there's nothing
have
you
to.
can do
Yeah.
about that. Like, he's
Yeah.
going to be on the roster. It's not.
If you go out there,
season.
if you go out
No.
there and spend significant money on a starting pitcher and then patch everything else up, or let's say you get one impact bat, but then you get a great start, everyone's going to lose their mind because it's like, hold on, how much money do we have set up in these starters and we still can't hit?
Yeah.
Like, what are we doing?
Yeah,
Like, regardless, it's about the money as well. All these guys are making a crap load in the rotation. You got to make them work.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, they got to perform. And if you don't think they're going to, then you have to make that move before the season starts. What do we do with Bo Bichette? I think because, like I said that at the beginning of the podcast.
I think you just got to go into the season with him healthy,
not under contract.
How can you give him the contract? Like the last 2 seasons, he's been hurt now recently, and obviously this past year it's been tough. He's not going to, like, the Jays would look at that and say, well, okay, we're not going to pay you like an absorbent amount like you might have wanted if you'd put up a Bo Bichette year last year.
Right.
But his agency will see it that way. His agent will see, well, it was just a blip in the road, and he won't be signed.
Here's the difficult part. Here's the difficult part of all this. I actually think Bo Bichette's going to be good next year. I actually would project Bo Bichette to be a good player next year.
So would I.
Yeah,
I hope so,
right.
For this team to do anything and to be a Tigers or a freaking Kansas City Royals, he has to be good.
Yeah.
There's no other way of looking at it.
So that's the tough part of it. This is not an Alek Manoah of last year where you're thinking, I have no idea what I'm going to get from this guy. I legitimately expect Bo Bichette to be an 800 OPS guy again next year. I expect him to be one of the better hitters in the American League next year. I think that this season was an outlier. I think that the guy who's put up so much great stuff on tape and on paper for the last half decade, I think that's just gone in his age 26 season. Like I think that he's going to have a good season, but ultimately, like you mentioned, now it's a tough question where you can't have the best of either world, because if the Blue Jays are a good team next year, you're not going to trade Bo Bichette because you're trying to contend. And if you're a bad team, well then the worst case scenario has occurred again. You're a bad team again, and obviously if the Blue Jays are going to be bad, Bo Bichette probably won't be that great because he's one of the major sticking points on whether or not they'll be good next year. So I'd imagine if they're not good, he's probably not very good. So that's obviously the nightmare scenario. It's a really tough situation for the Blue Jays to be in. I'm not sure what they do. The only feasible scenario where I think that all sides are happy is if the one guy the Blue Jays signed is Willy Adames. And you have Willy Adames, you park him at shortstop, you trade Bo Bichette for some other parts of the roster that can help you out.
Yeah.
To me, that's the only feasible way I see where the best case scenario occurs. But even then, I mean, I think Bo Bichette can have a good season next year, and trading him, that would be a tough proposition when you need offense, and he obviously provides a lot of that. So to me, I think this is going to be one of the most interesting and difficult problems the Blue Jays have had in a long time, to be honest with you.
I just don't.
These next 12 months are going to be.
They're going to be what, Rob?
Wow.
Oh, buddy.
Cut at the actual end of your sentence.
People who don't know what happened.
I kicked out.
Yeah, you just froze, buddy. Right as you were about to tell. Right at the hook, you were about to give us. You cut out. You froze on us.
I just said they were going to be insane. It could go.
Whatever. Yeah, boo. Yeah.
I was ready for that, man. I thought you were going to say something crazy and it cut out, and I was like, oh man, leave me on the edge of my seat, but it didn't. It's all right.
It didn't say anything. But so, like Rob said, in my opinion, you can't let a guy like Bo Bichette walk for free. You also can't let a guy like Bo Bichette have his value diminished even more halfway through the year if you're out of it because he's also been bad, and then you trade him then. You can't do either of those two things. So, in my opinion, you do what Rob said, and which is best case scenario. You solidify your shortstop position, and you trade Bo Bichette if you can't come to an agreement.
But are you trading him now for 80 cents on the dollar, if not less?
Well, I don't think that's what it is right now.
I hope not. We don't know. I hope not.
Yeah, I don't think that's what it would be right now because I think everybody's thinking what you're thinking. An off year in a bad team morale year, when we have a significant sample of that just not being the case for Bo Bichette, dealt with an injury all year, played 81 games. So even in the sample that he did provide you in 2024 was half a season's worth of baseball. I think that any front office is looking at Bo Bichette and they're going, okay, maybe I can get him on 95 cents to the dollar or 90 cents to the dollar. But I think that 90 cents to the dollar is better than 70 cents to the dollar in July.
But it's still a bad trade. But it's
I
still
will
ultimately
say,
a bad trade. So you're getting his value.
let's be honest.
No,
Let's be honest.
but it's
Regardless of you
the
trading,
bad of previous, not the bad of future.
you losing Bo Bichette, you're
Yeah,
losing
if
the
you're
trade
trading Bo Bichette,
regardless.
yeah,
You're
you
losing
are.
the
That's
trade
exactly.
regardless.
Yeah.
And also, I think
Right,
that
there's no way to win it. Yeah.
No, the teams will be kind of.
I mean, it may help your roster construction, but you're not winning the actual trade, which is like
No, and
obviously.
I think teams will be a little
Right.
bit more hesitant because of the, I don't want to say injury concern, but a lot of soft tissue, a lot of, was it a calf strain, oblique, something like that? But he's had that like 2 or 3 times now, and it's barked a lot with him, right?
Yeah, but they all go through physicals before the
That's
trade
fine.
goes through. Yeah.
No, I'm not saying that.
Yeah,
I'm mentioning the risk of possible future injuries, albeit George Springer did deal with that in his first season with the Jays, and look at that, he's been healthy ever since, and also not great, but it's fine on the field. So
An older player though, not the same.
No,
older player.
Again, father time being a dick. Anyways, fellas, I don't know if is there anything else you guys want to touch on. I mean,
So there's 2 things, last things I want to. Well, actually, like one more thing about the Bo Bichette front is that it really does feel like unless the Blue Jays have this Cinderella finish and they go out and they win the World Series next year, and then who cares what the hell happens, whether they pay him or whether he walks for nothing. Unless they go out and win the World Series, it just feels like we're bound for a rough ending. We're bound for an ugly ending, like we saw with a lot of other former Jays, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Other than Jose Bautista, of course, he was like the one guy that you actually had like it was a cordial ending. Whereas I think with Bo Bichette, unfortunately, I hope this doesn't happen with Vlad. I hope they just pay Vlad and then he's a Blue Jay for the rest of his career. But ultimately, I think specifically for Bo Bichette, it's headed down an ugly path where this divorce could end ugly one way or another. Hopefully that doesn't happen. And then I'll save these last 2 points for the end. Go ahead, Cole. I know you want to say something.
No, you were good.
Fire away, buddy.
All right.
Let it fly.
Last 2 things. So one, Jays fans, I know we talked a lot. I know the offseason plan is daunting, but guess what? You don't have to win a lot of games to make the playoffs. And if you make the playoffs, look at the Orioles. Sorry. Oh, you can look at the Orioles, how bad they are. You can laugh at that. You can look at the Royals, look at the Tigers. That's all you really need to do. It's not a whole jump. You don't need an A+ offseason to beat next year's Detroit Tigers. And last but not least, the Baltimore Orioles. We're going to have a little bit of fun before we sign off. All that talk about all their prospects and all of the winning they do when they have a new ownership, we're going to spend money. Bullshit. Zach, you got the best guy you traded for at the deadline. You'd rather have Jackson Holliday than win a World Series for the 2nd straight year. And guess what? Sit with us on the couch of teams that can go to the postseason, get swept, and score 1 run in 2 games. Welcome, Baltimore Orioles. I welcome you.
And it's also crazy because we are literally welcoming them in because none of their guys are signed.
Yeah.
And I understand they have a lot more leash, but it comes quick. Just ask.
Here's one more. Here's one more. Another bold takeaway. Despite the fact that the Orioles have passed us,
He's cooking.
Mark this down. The Blue Jays win a playoff game before the Orioles do. Mark it down.
Albeit, you want to hear a
That's
crazy
quite
stat?
the
You want to hear a crazy stat? The Baltimore Orioles in their last 10 playoff games, 0-10.
Oh,
I'll just leave that there.
they're 0-10 in their last 10?
They were 0-9 going into play today.
Oh my God.
6 of those are against the Royals. They got swept against them in 14 in the ALCS, and obviously you got swept this series too. So
and of course in there,
Royals,
the Blue Jays won a wild card game against them.
Yeah, I was there.
I was there. Big deal.
Wow, that's insane. And okay, I just want to point out for all the O's fans that have made memes about me and made memes about Blue Jay Center because of me, it wasn't me this time. Although I still agree, poverty franchise. Yeah.
All right, boys. Well, there goes that. That's a way to sign off the season right there. Boys, it's been a blast as always. Rob's going to cheer for his Tigers since he's in Windsor, but he'll probably be at one of the playoff games coming up in the DS, I presume. So that's fun. Boys, it's been a blast. Rob, Cole, thank you, boys, as always. And I presume we'll be talking to you guys throughout the offseason, hopefully a lot. All right? So appreciate you, boys, and go Jays.
Go Jays.
Go Jays.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Blue Jays Center on YouTube, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.